Welcome. My name is Peter Strong, and I provide online therapy via Skype for the treatment of anxiety and depression, and also for agoraphobia. So if you are interested in getting help to overcome your agoraphobia, then you might consider seeing an online therapist like myself. I have made it a mission to try and provide effective, practical ways of working with the anxiety and panic attacks associated with agoraphobia. And that's why I offer this online therapy service. The methods that I've developed is called mindfulness therapy, and it's extremely effective in teaching you how to not only neutralize your anxiety, but eliminate it completely through training, through effective practical training using mindfulness-based methods. The central method that we use is called mindfulness-based exposure therapy. As you will undoubtedly understand by now, it is extremely important that you do not fall into the trap of avoidance. You must face your anxiety, face those situations that trigger that anxiety, but you must do it in a strategic way with appropriate training. It is not sufficient to simply throw yourself into that anxiety-provoking situation and try to struggle through. That kind of exposure is not really very effective. So if you want to be successful with exposure therapy, you need to take a strategic approach with a lot of training. And so this is the theory behind mindfulness-based exposure therapy for agoraphobia. We start by setting up a series of challenges, and then we work through each challenge in a systematic way, starting with easy challenges and progressing to harder challenges. But the important thing is that you do each challenge well, and that you reach your goal of being able to do that challenge without being overwhelmed by anxiety. So the primary way we go about doing this is through mindfulness meditation. We meditate on that challenge, we play it through in the mind, and we watch for the anxiety reactions. When we find an anxiety reaction, we respond to it with mindfulness. That is, that we open to it, we embrace that anxiety, and we treat it very much in the same way that we would treat a friend or a child or even an animal that we encountered that was in pain. You don't avoid the child in pain, you go towards the child, and you then explore comforting the child to help it overcome its pain. This is a basic strategy that you already know. Well, we should adopt that same strategy in relationship to our emotions, to our anxiety. We need to go towards our emotions, we need to face them, but we need to embrace them in the same way, with compassion and with a great deal of consciousness, to really explore the structure of that anxiety. How does it work? One of the first things we learn to work with is the outer structure of the anxiety, which is in the form of reactive thoughts. These are conditioned, habitual, reactive thoughts that get triggered when you encounter the situation, the particular triggers in that challenge. They get triggered from conditioning, and they then produce an anxiety reaction. So we need to work with those thoughts, because the thoughts are a very important part of the structure of the anxiety. Thoughts do not cause anxiety. That is a common misconception. But thoughts are a very powerful fuel source that feeds anxiety and increases its intensity. So we learn to work mindfully with those thoughts. We learn to not identify with those thoughts. We learn to see them as objects and not become lost in that series of habitual thoughts. We learn to recognize the thought clearly, to acknowledge it, but then to stay as an observer, embracing the thought, but not indulging in the thought. So it's like seeing a child that's in pain, but not becoming as upset as the child. You have to remain independent of that child's suffering if you want to help the child. So we have to learn to be an observer. Really, it's like learning to be a parent in relationship to the anxiety. We learn to be bigger. We learn to develop a relationship based on compassion rather than reactivity. That is what will help the anxiety heal. In fact, that is what it requires in order to heal. It needs you to be a parent to it. So we find each emotional reaction and we help it heal by the quality of our relationship to it, by developing more compassion and more consciousness. Then we replay the scene in our mind of the challenge and look for other anxiety reactions and other triggers, and we work with those in the same way until we can go through the entire challenge in our mind without anxiety. Then, after this training period, which may be half an hour of meditation before the challenge, we then go and do the challenge, and we put it into practice. We put the training into practice. We recognize the anxiety if it arises, and the training will help it resolve during the challenge. We then meditate after the challenge on any fresh anxiety that did not resolve. So we train with that anxiety and help it resolve in the same way. And after that, we repeat the challenge again. And we keep cycling through, meditating before the challenge, doing the challenge, meditating after the challenge, taking a break, and then repeating until we can do the challenge with zero anxiety. We are not learning anxiety tolerance techniques. Other people teach that. I do not. I am interested in healing the anxiety so that it does not arise in the first place. And it can be done very successfully because anxiety is primarily a habit, a series of habitual reactions. Habits can be changed. Mindfulness therapy is all about changing those habits by bringing more consciousness and more compassion to the habit itself. You cannot overcome anxiety by some sort of rational thinking protocol. trying to convince yourself that it's irrational and that you won't have a panic attack, that simply does not work. You have to heal the anxiety. Then those thoughts will come in. Yes, it's irrational. I'm going to get through this. It's going to be fine. But it's based on experience, not based on some wishful thinking. So we work in this very strategic, experiential way with our emotions. We work at a very deep level, working with the external structure, which is the constellation of reactive thoughts that feed the anxiety. We also work with the internal structure. So what is the internal structure of anxiety? Well, that internal structure is primarily in the form of imagery. This is one of the central features of my teaching on mindfulness therapy, is to explore the imagery of the emotion. So all emotions are based around internal imagery. It's the organizing force, if you like, that holds that energy together to produce fear or depression or anger or any other emotion. This is something that I've observed over the years and found to be very effective when we start to uncover the imagery of the anxiety and then start to change it with compassion to help that emotion heal. Because when the imagery changes, then the emotion changes with it. And this is a natural mechanism that we're utilizing. Emotions work through imagery. This is a natural process. And when an intense emotion resolves itself naturally, it does so by changing its own internal imagery. You can see this for yourself if you think about a traumatic experience, for example. At the time, the imagery of that emotion is very intense, it's very large, and it's very overpowering because it is very large and very intense in color. But over time, that traumatic image becomes smaller. It naturally shrinks in size, and the colors tend to fade. And that's why we say things like, oh, that's a distant memory now, I've gotten over that now, it's not as big a problem as it was then. This language tells us a lot about this internal imagery that I'm talking about. If you have gotten over a traumatic experience, it is because the position of the image of that trauma has become lower in your psychological internal visual field. You have raised yourself above the emotion. Also, if it becomes smaller, when we say things like it's not so big a problem anymore, we're referring to the imagery. So you can think about this yourself and contemplate this phenomenon. But I think it's really quite convincing when you examine it that emotions are based around imagery, and when that imagery changes, the emotion changes. So we look at the internal structure and we help it change. So this is part of the training that we do during our meditation before and after the challenge. We help that imagery change in a direction that resolves the anxiety. So this is a brief introduction to mindfulness-based therapy for agoraphobia. If you would like to talk to an online therapist like myself for help overcoming your agoraphobia, then please reach out to me by email and let's schedule a Skype therapy session. Most people see results very quickly when they take this strategic and very in-depth approach to working with anxiety. So you can expect, and you should expect, to see significant changes within 3 to 4 sessions. And then when you start to apply these methods yourself, you will continue that progress, and eventually you will get to that position where you do not feel overwhelmed by anxiety or panic attacks. So that is our firm commitment, our firm goal in mindfulness therapy. It is not to tolerate or manage anxiety, it is to eliminate it, it is to heal it. So if you'd like to get started, please contact me. Thank you.